Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. How you doing? I'm Sean Butler. That's Bugsy Malone. This is episode 103 of Tottenham Walks. Guys, do me a favour, please, if you wouldn't mind, smash a like button for a man. Smash a subscribe if you haven't already. Smash the notification bell to stay updated. And smash a comment, especially on this video, because some of the things I'm talking about are going to be lots of supposition and kind of opinions that are not fully formed. The information is difficult at the moment to get hold of any kind of concrete stories, but there are ways in which this breaking story from last night probably can and does affect Tottenham, and so we're going to talk about it on the channel. But I really do want to stress that there's every chance that some of the things that I might say are either inaccurate or irrelevant, or I'm overlooking major things. I don't mean to be. There's no intention there. I'm just trying to make sense of what I can find at the moment, knowing full well that this story is a moving target. And the story, guys, is all about Juventus. So last night, breaking news out of Italy was that the president of the Juventus Football Club, Andrea Agnelli, and his vice president Pavel Nedved, and the entirety of the Juventus board have all resigned with immediate effect as a consequence of an ongoing investigation into financial irregularities and accounting that leads back to I think from like 2019 to 2021, so 3 years ago period. And it all comes down to the fact that they have potentially massively misrepresented their losses for the year, which they stated were about £220 million. But in fact, could be very different from that, and it all relates to how they've represented the actual valuations of player sales. Now, why does that relate to Tottenham? Actually, before I get there, let me finish the point by saying that in some reports in Italy, this has been said to be as big as, if not bigger than, the match bribing scandal that led to Juventus being relegated in 2006. So depending on how this whole thing shakes out, there could be ripples that affect not just Juventus, but potentially clubs that have, stakes or like vested interests in some of the players maybe, or some of the outcomes. And it's a criminal investigation, so it's very, very serious. How does this affect Tottenham? Well, in the first instance, there's kind of three avenues here that I want to explore with you. And again, I don't know how relevant one or two of them may be, so let me know if you can help me out along the way. In the first instance, you've got Antonio Conte. Now, we all know, if you've been watching this channel and watching any Tottenham information, you know that Antonio Conte has got 6 months left on his initial deal with us. There is the option to extend the deal by a year, but for all intents and purposes, Tottenham, Levy, Enoch, Paratici, they're all desperate to sit down with him and figure out a contract extension that lasts 2 or 3 years to secure his future at the club. What the eventuality of that grey area around Conte's future has led to in the media is this continued story that pushes the narrative that Antonio Conte is waiting for the struggling Allegri, the Juventus manager, to be relieved of his duties, and that Conte has one eye on the future and wants to be back at Juventus, where he has that massive history. He was a player there, he's been a manager there, and he would like to go back to his club that he considers his home. His family still lives in Italy, and that story hasn't gone away. It doesn't seem to want to disappear, and you can understand why. There's fuel for the fire. With what happened last night happening, that story now has more legs than it did 24 hours ago. And that is because the president and owner, Andrea Agnelli, has resigned. Now, he's not resigned the ownership of the football club. He's still the owner of the football club, but you can't sell a club overnight. I'm not sure if he will sell the club, but in terms of his role and responsibilities as a public-facing official, as someone who's involved in the day-to-day operations of the club, he has apparently resigned and stepped away. That does affect the Conte story in as much as that was one of the roadblocks to make that story of him leaving Tottenham and going to Juventus make sense. Whilst those two had a great relationship in the past, it ended very with a bitter taste in everybody's mouth. They fell out and they never made up. He quit or resigned, and they haven't spoken since, allegedly. And there's even rumours that, you can see pictures of it on the internet, that Conte put his middle finger up in a picture that was seen or shown doing it towards Agnelli, the owner. And so that kind of frosty relationship still exists. But with him out of the way, that's one of the largest roadblocks to seeing Juventus and Conte be reignited under a new board, a new president, vice president, new managerial system. So on the one hand, you could interpret this news as like in one vein of light and say that increases the likelihood of Conte leaving. Now, whether or not there's any truth to that, who knows? Whether or not you as a Tottenham fan will be happy or sad about that will depend on whether you're Conte in or Conte out. But there's certainly something there to kind of pause and have a second thought about. There's an entirely another angle that you could review this as, and that is that, well, why would Conte want to leave Tottenham to go to a club whose future positions, whose future situations could be entirely bleak? Whether or not the decision of whatever the culpability of their wrongdoing is made in the short term or long term, there is hanging over the head of that club a potential relegation if what reports in Italy say is true, that this story is bigger than the story in 2006 that led to them being relegated. But even if relegation doesn't happen, any guilty verdict would lead to surely some significant financial penalties, and clearly if they're already misrepresenting their financial losses, then their financial situation is bleak and dire anyway. You haven't got to be an accountant to figure that out. And the fact that all of their board have resigned, that suggests guilt, doesn't it? The entirety of the board wouldn't resign if they were innocent. So the likelihood is that they're going to be found guilty of something in the future. Would Conte really want to go take over a club that has this noose around their neck, and then he could find himself managing a team that's in Serie B next season or the season after? I don't think so. Plus also the consequences of being relegated to the Serie B or facing a huge financial fine is really where I want us to take this story now, because I see it as a glass half full opportunity for Tottenham, in as much as the consequences of those outcomes would be that Juventus would likely have to sell or liquidate some of their best assets. Now in 2006 they didn't do that. Most of their players, their biggest name players at the time, hung around and rode out relegation with Juventus. But those players, the likes of Buffon, the likes of Del Piero, Pavel Nedved, etc., those players were long-term servants and devotees of the football club. The best assets that Juventus have right now are far more recent signings, and I've got some names for you to go through. Dusan Vlahovic signed 6 months ago, a player that Tottenham would have loved to have got in the summer. Arsenal were heavily linked with him. Gleison Bremer, remember him? That amazing beast of a centre-back in the central centre-back role with shoulders for miles. Ended up going to Juventus for about 30 million. Tottenham needed him. Tottenham would love to have him now. Only been there 6 months. Paul Pogba, only been there 6 months. Manuel Locatelli, he's been there a bit longer, an absolute dream of a player, great midfielder, absolute worldie. A player that I've spoken about on this channel at Tottenham. Filip Kostic, a player that we all wanted as well as Tottenham fans, 12 million quid. He's only been there 6 months. Weston McKennie, a name that is continuously linked to Tottenham right now. Playing in the World Cup for America, player that apparently Paratici and Conte adore and would love to bring in. Adrian Rabiot, a player that's going to be released for free in January, hopefully. Not a player that maybe most fans want at Tottenham after what he said about Tottenham not being good enough for him, but a classy player and one that we spoke about on this channel just a couple of days ago. Wojciech Szczesny, ex-Arsenal trainee and Arsenal goalkeeper, an amazing goalkeeper, plays for Juventus, has been linked with Tottenham in the last week or so. Not that I think he'll ever come to Tottenham because of the Arsenal connection, but just worth pointing out. What about Danilo, that right back? How many options would he solve for us? An amazing right back. We've even got the likes of Bonucci, who is obviously a long-term servant, who probably would go down with the ship because of his, his age and his tenure and his loyalty. But still an amazing player and one that has been linked with Tottenham Hotspur. My point is, guys, I'm not suggesting for a second that Tottenham will sign any of those players necessarily, or that those players will immediately become available. But in an outcome where Juventus are found guilty of a criminal act of fraud and defrauding the tax office, then the consequences will be bleak and dire for Juventus, and the outcomes of that, the collateral damage of that, could easily see a lot of their best assets being listed for sale. And therefore maybe Tottenham could be one of probably dozens of football clubs that would love to be able to go in there with some money that will hopefully not have to represent full value for those players, but money that could expedite the closure of this drama and this period for Juventus, but ultimately that could help Tottenham Hotspur as well. I'm not suggesting for a second that Tottenham can go and just make that stuff happen, but it adds a more positive light, I think, to this story, where we don't have to see Antonio Conte's departure to Juventus as having an increased likelihood. You could actually see it as having a decreased likelihood, because Juventus will be in the mud for a few years, and why would he want to go and take on that horrible battle? And instead, he could lean on Paratici and the relationship that both he and Paratici have with the club, the relationships with the internal figures, if there's any of them left, to actually try and lift some of those players that are surplus to asset requirements in the Juventus system and take them to Tottenham. There is, behind door number 3, another potential lingering, looming headache, and this is where I really need your help to fill in the gaps, because my memory's not great, but I'm pretty certain that Fabio Paratici was the director of football at Juventus smack bang in the period that this accounting irregularities happened. And if you are dealing with accounting irregularities around player sales, then the director of football is going to be aware of it. I'm also pretty sure that back in January, I think it was, of this year, there was the noise that Paratici was going to be indicted alongside 14 or 15 other men involved with Juventus. I don't know, so I'm asking you to help me out here, but I'm pretty certain that these things are going to be very much connected. And I can't find any news this morning that is suggesting that Paratici might get dragged back into this whole quagmire of nonsense. But if anyone else out there knows and can figure out whether or not that there is this issue that is re-emerging, because I thought that Paratici's problems were all over and done with. I thought that stuff had all gone away. Perhaps it hasn't. And if you guys can let me know, if you do know, is there any likelihood that not only that Tottenham could be dragged into this conversation with Juventus for the third reason, not because we're going to get any of their players, not because Conte's going to leave and go to Juventus, but because Paratici is somehow going to get dragged into a criminal investigation again and maybe be indicted or found guilty of wrongdoing, then how that affects us, I have no idea. But if any of you guys, and I know there's a lot of smart people in my community, if any of you guys have any insights on this, please let me know. As I say, a lot of the stuff I've said could be completely way out of left field, inaccurate, or maybe I'm missing major talking points. But I've done as best I can with the information that I found this morning. It's all interesting, guys. Do you see it as a glass half full view where Tottenham can benefit from this, or do you see it as a glass half empty where Tottenham actually could be losing, or more likely to lose, a manager, and that could throw even more chaos into our January plans? Let me know your thoughts, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Like, share and subscribe, and as always, guys, bye bye.